Well, good afternoon, everybody. Bon après-midi à toutes et à tous. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us today for the latest Policy Insights Forum brought to you by Samuel Associates. And on behalf of our Chief Executive, Goran Pesek, and the entire team at Samuel, I'm Mark Norman, be moderating today's discussion. And I'm very excited about the opportunity we have to spend an hour or so together this afternoon and discussing a very important topic, veterans transition, and specifically veterans transition in the digital age. We're joined today by an amazing panel of incredibly accomplished Canadians, and they'll all bring a different perspective, and certainly their contributions to the armed forces, to Canada, and to industry, I think will give us an opportunity to sort of have an overview and different views on what transition is all about, what it means. Fundamentally, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through their extensive backgrounds. Their biographies were posted. I just will quickly, however, introduce who you're seeing on your cameras today. First of all, Christine Whitecross, retired Lieutenant General, former Chief of Military Personnel, Commandant of the NATO Defense College, and a variety of other things in her distinguished career, has agreed to join us. And she'll be our keynote speaker and be kicking off the discussion. She's joined today by Eleanor Taylor, retired Lieutenant Colonel, infantry officer, who will be providing her own views on transition, what it means to her, and what she's observed over her career. We've also got Kira Antalya, a retired naval warfare officer who is pursuing her own path in both education and digital technology. And Kira's got some very interesting insights. She's also representing Coding for Veterans, who are one of the supporters of our discussion today, and we look forward to hearing what she has to say. And last but certainly not least, we've got Steve Visnick, who, among other things, is the president of the Cabin Group, a leader in the private sector. And it's really him that we will thank for bringing us all together today and having this discussion. Every journey in transition is different, and every story is different. And it's important that we try not to pigeonhole people into specific experiences or specific categories. In that context, I think we recognize that we could have a panel of 1,000 veterans, and we'd have 1,000 different stories. We can't do that, obviously, we don't have the time. But it's important that we look at this from the perspective of what observations or lessons can we possibly take from the discussion today. We're not trying to map out every possible consideration, nor do we believe that we can solve the many layers of challenge that are associated with veterans transition, but we'd like to highlight some of the key considerations going forward, and that hopefully we can learn from what we're about to hear. This isn't a how-to discussion. I don't think any of the panelists today are going to presume to offer advice based on their own experience, but simply want to share those experiences so that we can get a better sense of what some of the issues are that are out there. The selection of the title in the digital age was intentional, and it was designed to really capture two overlapping themes. The first theme is the issue of demographics and how it's important to look at this through the lens of what we would describe as the new veteran, the 21st century veteran, who is not the same as what Canadians traditionally think of when they think of a veteran. And the second dimension of this is that as a result of the demography of many of the people who are in transition today, the tools for communication, the tools for support, and potentially social interaction and job prospects are all tending more towards the digital environment. And so that there's these two dimensions of the digital age that we'd like to discuss and focus on today. Part of the motivation for the discussion today comes from feedback from employers and veterans alike. And it's interesting that many of employers that certainly we've spoken to, and Steve representing that community here today, have indicated that they'd like to find more veterans and bring them into their workforce, but that they find it difficult to access that pool of talent on a regular basis. And conversely, veterans themselves are frequently left to their own devices to seek out opportunities, even with employers who might be predisposed to wanting to bring them into the team. So with that as context, here we are on the eve of Canada Day, and I think it's appropriate that we would be discussing a subject that should remind us of why we should be so proud of the country, notwithstanding the day-to-day challenges that many Canadians are facing. We owe an enormous debt to those who have served and ultimately have given the ultimate sacrifice in the name of Canada. So I'll kick things off now by asking Christine Whitecross to say a few words. Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for those opening comments. So I'm going to make my comments as quick as possible, given the time constraints, but I just want to take us back to 2015, back when I was Chief Military Personnel, a little bit of background on this whole thing called the journey. I think Mark alluded to it, but probably not intentionally. And it was really an idea brought about by the Chief of Staff at the time to change the way we treat, to change the way we perceive our military personnel throughout their entire lifetime. And that included the transition from military service to civilian life. And the idea was really to set up an organization that helped them when they retired, specifically to make sure their pension, their medical, their dental, they had a home to go to, like they had a home to live in, and that they had a job, and that they had job satisfaction that came from that job. And I mean, I think there's a lot of work to be done still in that space. But basically the genesis for a lot of that happened way before that, for sure. But in terms of the current lexicon that we're using in terms of the journey, I think that came from that time. So I retired in December of 2020, so fairly recently. And to prepare for this little talk, I took the opportunity to speak to some folks at VAC and the CMP staffs to really see what is happening, what has happened since, not since my retirement, but certainly in the last couple of years in terms of the transition. So I'd like to offer 4 thoughts. And these thoughts are meant to provoke some questions moving forward. So my first thought is releasing is really a significant life event. And I think we underestimate the impact, the emotional impact that releasing has on many people, whether they want to release, whether they don't want to release, but because of medical issues are being forced to release, or others. So For me, after almost 39 years of service, I thought I was really ready, and I was, ready to hand in my ID card and all that. And I tell you, it was a significant emotional event for me to hand over my military ID card and to receive my veterans card, because to me, that was an incredible space of time and experience and everything that I've now been put on the back burner. And that's how it felt for me. So, and it's different for different people. So imagine if you had to release for other reasons, and you didn't get to do a full extent of 35-year service or something, it could be a significant event. And I think we underestimate how that impacts folks. And I certainly can offer during the pandemic, it's probably been a little bit worse than it was in the past. Second observation, there are some stats that, there are a number of vets that are being employed, but the reality is they're being underemployed. And this is really the priority challenge for veterans, certainly in terms of those that have found employment. And it's a recurring theme. So a job doesn't necessarily equal to job satisfaction. So I've looked at a number of websites of organizations who want to employ vets, and they're all saying the right things, the right words. I would just submit to say that maybe communications, as Mark alluded to, needs to be worked a little bit harder. It's definitely, I don't think, well understood what it means to be a veteran. And I look specifically for the Government of Canada, for the priority hiring. There's some miscommunication or misunderstandings of what that actually means. And I think there needs to be a little bit more work done in that. So a lack of understanding. Also on the skill sets and the experience that a military person brings to an organization. Just a little tiny example, and I know Eleanor is on the screen. So if a CV was to say that an infantry officer or an infantier had been to Afghanistan, I think that conjures up a whole bunch of other sort of visions or possibilities or competencies if you don't understand what it means. But to me, I see that and I automatically lead to, leadership, management skills and in terms of resources, loyalty, ability to work in a very stressful environment, under extreme measures, just teamwork and a whole bunch of other really positive attributes that I don't think are necessarily well understood in the CV. So, I could go on, but this, and this just doesn't necessarily resonate all that well, translate all that well in the CV. Which sort of brings me to my third comment, and that's about HR processes. Having been CMP, a chief military engineer or chief military personnel, and understanding the military HR, I think that there's work to be done in human resources, policies, and processes in order to help facilitate the hiring of veterans. And I would say little things like the necessity for a bachelor degree when we say that it's an essential requirement for a particular job. And yet we know that the experience, the training, the skills that the people have garnered throughout their careers would probably be more equivalent in that space. And I think this could be a great opportunity for speaking for the question and answering. So what that does is really it screens out a number of potentially high regarded and highly effective people for organizations. And I think there's probably a little bit of a fear factor as well. Hiring a military person, a veteran. I'm not necessarily talking about those who want to encourage the hiring of veterans, but certainly in terms of the HR processes, what does that necessitate? What is that going to create? And those things. And so my fourth comment, which I think I'm going to leave on a hopeful note, is I think that it would be really helpful to have sort of a central repository for organizations that are discussing the hiring of veterans moving forward. And just little things like being able to engage on best practices or more public profiles, or maybe even speak to each other and to speak to the VAC and really get into understand what the Canadian Armed Forces does and what the certain backgrounds and experience and all of that kind of stuff, what that garners around a person and what that offers to employment opportunities. Anyways, really, really quick, 4 little areas I thought would be interesting for discussion. So I'll pass it back to you, Mark.
Thanks, Chris. I mean, those are 4 really good points for us to sink our teeth into. And I think you've framed this discussion at the macro level quite effectively. So Eleanor, now I'd like to ask you to provide your opening comments, if you would, please.
Sure, and thanks very much. And thanks for the privilege of being able to talk on this important subject. It continues to astound me how much support folks want to give veterans as they transition. I do want to start off by being really frank about the fact that while there is no panel that represents all veterans, the reality is that we are all from the officer corps, and 4 of us senior officers, 2 general officers and flag officers, and we need to acknowledge that there is a network that we have accessible to us, and the ease with which we transition around administrative processes. And I just want to be frank about that. So I do also believe that there remains significant collaborative work to be done to close the gaps that occur sometimes when severely ill or injured veterans transition. As someone who has both close friends and an immediate family member who transitioned in that state, I believe I have an understanding of some of the challenges that our veterans face in that state. But these conversations are complex, nuanced, and require a variety of stakeholders at the table to ensure we have meaningful solutions that are derived from them. And I'm confident that those conversations are happening. They're not complete, but they're certainly happening. And I don't want to replicate or attempt to replicate that. So I will not be talking about those significant challenges that ill and injured veterans face as they transition, but don't want to suggest for a moment that that omission suggests that they're not critically important. What I hope to do today is to focus my comments around helping potential employers understand some of the things that veterans face as they are transitioning, in spite of a lot of the resources that are available to us. And so, like General Whitecross, I will offer three comments. And the first is there is a transition tunnel that vets need to get through. And this takes time and different amounts of time. And I'll talk in more detail about that in a moment. Second, veterans may not know exactly what it is they're looking for on the other side. And I'll talk about why that might be. But one of the things that most veterans are looking for is a greater degree of autonomy and flexibility as they transition, something that they may not have had while they served. And finally, the work that veterans do needs to be aligned with a greater sense of purpose, with a sense of purpose. I believe that is the key to unlocking all of the enormous potential that veterans have and making sure that we can access all of the great things that we learned while in service in our next bound, and that's the key. So first, transition is a tunnel, and it takes time for veterans to get through the tunnel. And as General Whitecross said, people transition for a lot of reasons. Sometimes they conclude that service is no longer the right fit for them. Sometimes they come to the conclusion that the cost of service is simply too much for them or their families. Sometimes they transition because it's time, and sometimes health considerations drive those decisions. But one thing that is in many cases consistent, and that is that veterans have had a relatively stressful life, and sometimes it has been fueled with adrenaline and cortisol and all those things that keep us going through high intensity periods. And whether or not they know it, when they take off the uniform, when they hand in that ID card, there is a period it forces a period of reflection, whether they thought they needed it or not. And that period may take 6 months, or it may take 18 months. or they may not be afforded the ability to have it because of financial considerations, but it's necessary nonetheless, and they will be facing it while employed full-time. And so my recommendation to those veterans and those employers who can encourage it is that period of reflection, that transition tunnel, be enabled, and that work be done on both sides to make sure that the veteran is ready for the type of employment that they may want to leap into. The second point, veterans may not know exactly what it is that they want to get themselves, what kind of employment they want to engage in post-service. And there are lots of reasons for that. But one of the things that most of us are looking for is autonomy and flexibility. We hear a lot before we transition out of the military about setting the conditions for our transition, preparing our resume, learning how to network, learning what businesses are out there that we might be relevantly employed in. But I gotta be honest, doing that work is sort of like trying to learn a language from a textbook. It doesn't make a lot of sense until you start to interact in the field that you are interested in. And so while you can do some of the work, there's still a great deal of work that needs to happen. And a big part of my transition over the last while, and just to be clear, I left the regular force in the summer of 2019, and I left the reserve force very recently. And in the past year and a half, I've spent a lot of time doing a lot of different things. And I've learned about equally as much about what it is I am not suited for as what I am suited for. And I think a lot of people go through that transition. And so what does that mean? If you're bringing veterans on board, recognize that this is a period of exploration. And if you have the ability to offer a degree of flexibility during this time of transition, it's beneficial for both you and the veteran. And finally, veterans do best when we're aligned with a sense of greater purpose. I believe that this is a key, as I said, that unlocks the best of our leadership and organizational training. We have spent the majority of our lives doing work that aligns us with a greater purpose. And so when you find yourself on the other side doing work for a paycheck, it becomes, difficult to motivate yourself. And so if we can align veterans with work that means something to them, it really helps us leverage all of the best that we are. So for me, I spent a year doing probably more work than was helpful for me in my transition tunnel along a number of different fields. And right now I have settled on working one day of work a week for True Patriot Love to support them as they map out their women's initiative in support of service members and veterans. And this is work that's meaningful for me. And I've deliberately cut other work away so that I can focus on that and sort of regroup and do my own estimate on what it is I want the next stage of my life to look like. And once again, if you have the ability to match those things up, greater cause with your veteran, I think it's well worth it. So much more could be said on this complex subject. I hope it offers some insight as you work towards supporting our veterans, and I want to thank you for your time and attention.
Thanks, Eleanor. That very much appreciated, heartfelt insights, and acknowledge right up front how you introduced your remarks with respect to acknowledging that everyone is in a different circumstance, and that there are many who don't enjoy the level of access and fundamentally privilege that many of us have had, both in our careers and in our transition. So well done. Thank you. And I'm sure there'll be some interesting questions as a result of your comments. Kira, over to you. Give us your perspectives, please.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today, and thanks for the remarks that have been made so far. If it wasn't clear who the junior officer is, it will be now, because I don't have 3 or 4 points to make. But what I can offer is just a insight into my experience transitioning as a junior officer. So I was in the same boat as a lot of people, I think, where the skills that I learned from my trade didn't directly transition to a civilian occupation, which isn't meant to discredit all the soft skills that everyone does gain in the military, which I believe were touched on, and include things like leadership, communication, teamwork, which are all important in every industry and every job, every career that you'll have. But I knew that when I left, I was going to need to do a significant amount of retraining to start a new career. And this is where I'll address the transitioning members specifically with a small piece of advice. Everyone does tell you to plan, and as mentioned, it's so hard to do, but you need to go beyond the initial layer that I think most people look at, which is if you are going to go back to school, you can't just pick a program that you're interested in. You need to know specifically what job, what position that program is going to qualify you for. And then look at the job market and make sure that that position is there and in demand. Because I think that that's a problem a lot of people have. They end up working really hard to get a certificate or a diploma or a degree, only to find out that the job that they're newly qualified for isn't in demand. No one's hiring that position. So what I did is, before I left the military, I was accepted to a master's program at Queen's University, which I'm just completing now. But then about 6 months after I transitioned, I heard about a program called Coding for Veterans, which I'm going to take this opportunity to hype up a little bit, because I think it's a really wonderful program. And if you're not aware, there's a massive number of unfulfilled tech positions in the Canadian tech industry. So for people who are interested, again, addressing veterans, if you are interested in the tech industry at all, or you don't know what you want to do, which I think is the case for a number of people as well, I would suggest looking at Coding for Veterans. It's a very well-structured program. You don't need a background in programming or computer science, anything like that. It provides what people are looking for because it was designed with the industry partners. I'm in the home stretch of this program right now, the cybersecurity stream of the program. And I can tell you that looking at industry, there is a large appetite for these kinds of positions. And the opportunities exist in wherever you want to work. If you want to work in government, in a tech startup, health industry, banking, etc. If you want to work from home, whatever. I know that was a really quick spiel, but I know we have a Q&A coming up. If anyone has any questions that they don't get the chance to address today, though, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I know it's sometimes hard to get those insights from the transition perspective. So if you need a light from the outside, please look me up if you have any questions about Coding for Veterans. My program is in computational biology at Queen's. So if you're interested in that or just need some general advice for the transitioning process, please don't hesitate. And thanks again for having me.
Well, Kara, thank you. Yes, no denying you are the youngest and junior member of the panel, but you bring a really important perspective, and that is, you're actively engaged in your own transition, and kudos to you for your courage, transitioning in the first place, and taking ownership of it, and for sharing your insights of your journey today. And I'm sure there will be some interest. So thank you for that. Steve, over to you. Thank you for bringing us all together today, and really curious to hear your insights as a private sector employer.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. First of all, I'd like to thank Samuel and Associates for organizing this as well. All the panelists, moderators. It's a pleasure to be in your presence. So thank you, and extending to all of the staff, and thank you for your service. Really appreciate it. I thought I'd touch a little bit about Cavan Group and where we have come. If we can put up the slide deck, I've just prepared a couple slides to educate a little bit about where we have come from over a relatively short period of time. If it doesn't come up, I can load this. So I'll go ahead. So Cavan Group, we're based out of Burlington, Ontario. We originally started business back in October of 2015. Our first 3 years in sales, we grew roughly about 2,200%. We were number 21 out of the 400 shortlisted fastest growing companies in Canada in 2019. We were one of the finalists for SME Magazine Canada for fastest growing companies. Outstanding Business Achievement Award for the Hamilton Chamber, Burlington Chamber Award of Excellence. And we're one of the leading integrated solutions and service company providers in Canada. Our primary business is focused around our staffing business. Originally, the business had created 3 divisions because we knew that there was multiple different opportunities for the company to deal with different companies across Canada. Our company was sold back in December of 2020. We are now a public company. And what this has allowed us to do is have further breadth and scope across Canada from coast to coast with our other partners and subsidiaries. But really, it's about finding the right type of solution for the candidates and for our customers. We do have our controlled goods, Canadian government controlled goods certificate. So we are certified. And our primary core business is direct placements, temporary or contract placements. We also have a foreign workers program. And our major focus is on supporting athletes and veterans. And much of the people, what do athletes and veterans really have in common? Well, there's actually quite a bit of similarities. Athletes will dedicate their entire career, much of their adult career into the late teens, training in their sport 5, 6, 7 days a week, multiple hours. So in that equation, it's really there, in the hopes to be in the Worlds or the Olympics and really a higher level of performance. Much of the veterans, they've placed their life for the country on the battlefield, and athletes have placed their life and their career, and they've essentially, both of them have put their lives on hold for the greater good. So we wanted to make sure that that was part of our mantra, that was part of our business and our ideals and fundamentals of how we actually structure what we have. Cavan Group is not about creating the simple and easy things. It's really customer centric. It's candidate and employee centric. We're not going to sell or market something that can't be used. We want to understand what the customer wants, what the candidate wants. And it's about fit versus fill. We're not interested in putting people into a company. We want to make sure that that individual is happy. It aligns with their goals. And Eleanor, you hit the nail on the head. This is exactly the kind of focus. So we would rather give the news to the customer and say we didn't find the right fit than putting somebody in that won't work 3 and 6 and 9, 12 months later. So really it comes down to the core values of how we run business and what we believe in. And those are cornerstones of our model. So again, just very, very happy to be a part of the team. And we're looking to create a solution here that can be adopted coast to coast. And we've done a lot of research, and we definitely see that there is an opportunity, a significant opportunity, on a lot of the veterans that are transitioning in the first, I would call it 18 months of the transitioning out of the military. So we think that is the sweet spot to be able to get them and really align ourselves with the veterans as they transition, to be able to get them into the workforce as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So thank you very much again for your time. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Steve. Really interesting to hear your perspective perspectives, not just with respect to the background of your company, but how you're viewing the potential value of veterans and athletes. A very interesting comparison, and I think it would resonate with many, not just the panelists, but those who are tuned in today listening. And as I said earlier, thanks for showing the initiative to kind of kick this off and get us talking about it, recognizing that we're not going to solve all those issues that have been raised in 1 hour. All right, so we've got about 20 minutes left. I'm sure we can extend, if there's sufficient interest to do so, a few minutes anyway. I'd like to initiate the Q&A session now. The instructions for asking questions are available to you. Basically, we'd ask you to send your questions to the moderator. They'll then get posted to me, and I've already got some questions already stacking up. But I'd like to give the first question to somebody who's been watching and is an interesting sort of dual personality. Ashton Correa joins us. He's a warrant officer in the militia, the Army Reserve. But more importantly, he's a senior academic at McMaster University who studies leadership and organizational behavior, among other things. And Ashton, I'd like to give you a chance to kick off the Q&A session. Over to you.
Hi, Mark. Thank you very much for the privilege of even just engaging this audience and panelists. Already myself, I just transitioned myself on June 11th, as Mark mentioned, as an infantry warrant officer with the Reserve Regiment. And it's something that definitely resonates with myself going through this process as well. Just as Mark just mentioned, I have initiated a different program with McMaster University. It's called the Industry Operations Leadership and Management Program, and it's really geared towards middle level managers. So the tactical level leadership, really focused from industry. And we found some really interesting insights. We actually had Brian McDonald from Samuel Associates join us, and he was one of the highest reviewed rated instructors that really resonated with our audience. So we're seeing a lot of overlap. One thing I was not prepared for that really, a data point that really impressed me was the unique approach that we introduced to a lot of the senior industry members on the course. So we had members from Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, Toyota, Tesla, GM, GE, and these were business leaders primarily from the manager, supervisor, junior director level. And we had a few senior managers, plant managers, and a COO on the program from medium-sized enterprises, I would say. So what we really found interesting was we trialed the first mentorship program throughout the actual course. And it was heavily based on the intent-based approach that is adopted utilizing the mission command model within the military. And my experience with the military, when it was exposed to the reconnaissance side up to recce platoon operations and the platoon dismounted infantry operations, so still the tactical level, I would say, those tenets were instructed on our about 70 different leaders from the civilian sector within industry. And what we found was, as the military transitioned to the mission command model, industry has been transitioning out of the lean model or a hybrid approach to agile, adopting attributes of Industry 4.0 or this next stage of industry. And I stay away from the tech aspect, for example, but the digital leader model, that's what's been coined now, we found a heck of a lot of overlaps between the intent-based approach. And when we trialed this mentorship program, I believe it's the first one in Canada at least, that's been able to demonstrate an up to 11% performance improvement with the civilian industry leaders as assessed by their superiors and their subordinates. So not assessed by them and not assessed by us. And at the core of it was the intent-based approach, understanding how to craft a plan, bottom-up leadership, bottom-up decision-making, knowing your constraints. And so in essence, we found an archetype present within veterans transitioning now that is actually driving a performance increase within leaders and their businesses. So this was a very powerful insight. So I'd like to ask the panelists in particular, their insight into the overlap, if you will, between those tenets and execution principles from the mission command, or even just simplify like the intent-based approach. And for example, what they're seeing now within the job market or the industry sector, looking for bottom-up decision makers that can craft a plan working to an intent and end state. So that's what I'd like to open up with. Thank you, Mark.
Wow, what a laydown of insight. And I would hazard a guess that you have more hands-on insight into your own research and the observations. But I'll kick this off by, I'll throw this one at Eleanor and get her to comment initially, and then see what the other panelists might like to say. Go ahead, Eleanor, over to you.
Sure, thank you, and thanks, Ash. And what an interesting question. And I find it really interesting because in the context of the pandemic, I've done a little bit of speaking around crisis leadership with companies. And one of the things that I've described, which has serves us so well in the military, which as you say, in the civilian world, people are finding really interesting, is exactly that, is the ability to describe 2 levels up what the broader intent is, communicating it so clearly so that everybody understands their piece in the plan, having those folks at the bottom level develop their piece, and then war gaming it and rock drilling it together, such that in the context of a crisis, when the situation changes, as it invariably does, you have the ability to pivot rapidly. And I did not appreciate that this was not a skill set that was widely owned by everybody. I did not appreciate how unique it appears to be to the military context. And I had the privilege of doing a little bit of work with DFO this past fall, as they did some planning around how it was, that is the Department of Fisheries and Oceans here in Halifax, as they figured out how it was they were going to tackle some of the challenges that they faced with regard to enforcement. And they're a very professional group of individuals, well-trained, but this was not an area that they had spent a lot of time developing. And with just a little bit of the experience that I brought directly from my training in the military, I was able to help them craft their own plan, that bottom-up, intent-driven plan, which, as they fed back to me, was a real force multiplier as they went out on the water and had to do that very difficult and important work. So, I couldn't agree more that this is something that I've observed as a gap and something where we can bring a lot of value into industry.
Yeah, Chris, please.
I would, so I definitely mirror everything that Eleanor said, but I would offer two other things here. One of them is that the Canadian Armed Forces is an organization that continually provides professional development in terms of leadership, resource management, planning, strategic planning, understanding, communications, all those things that sort of wrapped around what you're talking about, Ashton. And so how great is that, an organization that at its core requires that regardless of the rank, whether you're a private all the way up to the CDS, requires you at certain parts of your career to understand better that thing called the Canadian Armed Forces, or better that thing called strategic planning or consequence management and all that kind of stuff. So that's the first thing I would offer. The second thing I would say is I think we develop, military folks and no doubt a number of other people develop this sense of situational awareness. It very quickly, it's a competency that they sort of garner very early on, and then they develop it throughout the years, this ability to go into an organization or into a situation and sort of understanding the impacts or how it needs to be better or what needs to be done very quickly. And then that's based on experience and background and training and, you know, battle rhythm and tabletop exercise, all that other kind of stuff sort of put all into one. So I think there's a tremendous sense of self in that organization that comes from just being a, you know, a military member, certainly in domestic or other ops. Anyways, I just offer that.
That's great, Chris. Thanks. Kira, I know you you introduced yourself initially with great humility. Admire that. But there must have been aspects of your own experience or training, even as a junior officer, that relate directly to Ashen's observations and his questions. Do you have got a comment to offer?
Sure. I guess it just speaks to how ingrained I think that fundamental training becomes in you. It's almost like your brain is now structured to think in this way. It no longer feels blocky or forced. And I think that's one of those kind of, not necessarily a soft skill, but one of those skills that's hard to explain to civilian employers, that it really does become automated, and it streamlines things, but yes, it's undervalued, and maybe yeah, it's hard to drive home to employers who aren't necessarily looking for that.
That's a good point. And I think it goes to this issue of translating those competencies. Steve, you're really well positioned to give us a perspective from the employer side of things.
Well, Sean, thank you for the question. It's actually it's very intriguing, and you see different perspectives here. You know, the military, from my perspective, outside looking in, extremely structured, disciplined, and really what we're talking about is repetition. And once you've developed the core skill sets and the techniques of how to do things, it's, you know, repetition is the mother of it. And being able to adapt and adopt those types of skill sets really translates to speed of execution. When you're able to execute something very, very quickly, it's that repetitive nature that you've been exposed to. So just like in our business, you know, growing over 2,000% doesn't happen by accident. You have to build a foundation. You have to build it with the right people. You have to communicate these things through and through. You know, and it's about, one of the biggest things is planning for the what ifs. You cannot build any business, you cannot build any type of plan without planning for the what ifs. And it may have, you know, multiple different resolutions or problems, but I can tell you last year in the midst of COVID, we grew over 25%. We had actually purchased all of our PPE in December when we saw the issue in December of 2019. We had actually positioned, because we support the healthcare industry. So we actually purchased all of our PPE in advance. So, you know, we were pre and post COVID, January and April. There was a little bit of a hiccup, but outside of that, and again, there were multiple different solutions and problems, but we just, you know, you have to plan the work and work the plan. And once you create that type of structure, there's nothing that can come at you if you're prepared well that you can't handle, but you do need to communicate and make sure you have the right team in place. So, you know, back to you, Mike.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Ashen, thank you very much for the insight. We learned from your question, which is one of the goals of our discussion today, is that we share a knowledge and understanding. So kudos to you for doing that, and certainly stimulated an important discussion. And I think it goes back to one of the key issues, which is, and you saw it come out in the answers, how do we recognize and in some respects translate the skills and experiences in a way which is readily understandable to employers, not all of whom are necessarily as fluent as Steve in some of the military experiences or jargon. And I think both Eleanor and Kira made those points. So there's other questions coming in, and a lot of them are very similar, asking a lot of themes. I guess one of the questions that would be useful is what have you found the most useful and arguably the least useful of the tools and support mechanisms that are available? And that can either be from your own experience or potentially from the observations of others. And Kira, I'm gonna put you on the spot, get you to answer that one first, so we get your perspective, and then I'll kick it over to everybody else.
Sure. So I guess it's finding that balance between planning to the point that it's not useful anymore, and not planning enough. I guess it comes back to that having more than one course of action. Yeah, so they build up, I don't know the transition process now. They have centers that you can go through, and they have these lists and lists and lists of all the things that you can do. And there's a certain point where you're not helping yourself, but then also you have to plan for things you can't predict, like the past year and a half, where a lot of things have obviously gone off the rails. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, great. Eleanor?
Yeah, I will say that I'm not going to offer anything as least useful, maybe not applicable to me. There have been a number of things that were not applicable in my context, but I would say, one of the most useful things that I received as I transitioned was from Veterans Affairs. So that required check in the box as I went through the door to say, hey, do you know that you're eligible for this, this, and this? And then not only that, but like I was quite surprised to receive a phone call following up to make sure that I understood what services were available to me. And while I may not avail myself of them right now, for example, the education benefit, it was really great to know that's available. Another thing that has been really helpful to me, probably more important in my employment transition than anything else, was, the people who I had gotten to know who were generous enough to sit down over a coffee with me and tell me, some of the important things to think about as I transition, and some people that I should go out and just have a coffee with so that I understand the business that I might be interested in pursuing. So those two things, that sort of a formal checklist, I thought was really important from VAC. And then the informal piece where you leverage those folks that who have gone before you for their assistance. And that's all, Mark.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Chris?
I think I may have lost the tenet of your question, Mark, but I would say that the things that I think the skills that I've developed through my terms of service that deal well with for me today, and certainly into transition into whatever this means in retirement, because I'm pretty new at it, is the ability to communicate, the ability to understand what communication means. And it's not just speaking or writing. There's a whole tenet of communications, including social media and all those kind of stuff. But I think the second one is adaptability, your ability to transition from one, probably poor choice of words, transition, but really to adapt from one scenario to another seamlessly, because these are sort of capabilities or skills that you've sort of garnered throughout your career. And I would just, and it's probably not one that most people would mention, but I would say, humility and those softer competencies, I think, that are personable and important as you go through and find something else. And that's understanding who you are and what you can provide to an organization in terms of positive and negative, and understanding sort of who you are in that space. I think that's what I would offer.
That's great. And I'd like to come back and pick up on something that Eleanor said. And, I think it's an important observation to share with the viewers, is that you didn't use the word, Eleanor, but I think this issue of mentoring is a key element. And nobody is too junior or too senior to benefit from mentoring, either as a recipient or as a provider. And, you know, there is a sense, I think, as a community, those who have successfully transitioned or not successfully, and how everybody can learn from those experiences. So I see a couple of dimensions of a need to pull things together. I know the team back in the office are keeping notes on how some of the key takeaways from this, but you know, certainly there's more work that can be done, both on connecting employers and employees, and that's the essence of why we're here. But I think there's also more work that can be done on connecting previous transitionees, make up a word, with those who are going through the experience now, so that there's a sense of community there. And another question came in, and really, Steve, this is more focused to you. So I'll give the other panelists a break while I throw this one at you. The question basically is, what could our industry partners indicate as the key job market or skill sets that would be most useful as Canada looks to pivot the nature of the economy? Examples are, you know, environmental, climate change, renewable energies, digital skills, those kinds of things. And as somebody who works, you know, at the coalface in terms of staffing all these different sectors of the economy, what are your thoughts? And if you can share with us what's going on in the back rooms of your offices as you folks brainstorm where you need to develop better bench strength, that would be really helpful for many of our viewers, I think.
Absolutely. I think initially trying to get an understanding of, and again, you know, an outsider looking in, I think the perception for the most part is, you know, that veterans or people that are transitioning are damaged goods. You know, they're not in either the mental or physical state to be able to be integrated back into society. That's one of them. Two, they're just resources that are not readily accessible to tie those transitioning veterans into the workforce. And that's one of the core areas that we've been focusing on. And again, it's not so much about what we have, it's about what is the candidate, what does the veteran need? And matching the veteran skills and looking at some of their transferable skills that they've developed while in the military, and how can we apply that into, you know, some of the real life private or public sector positions that we have available. So it's not a cookie cutter approach. It's not a one size fits all. It's a very, very individualized type of process that needs to happen. And to Eleanor's point earlier about the mentoring, you do need to walk those people through, because matching those type of real life, real world examples and skills that you've developed, and how does that apply into the private or public sector? So we've done a lot of work in the background to develop that piece of it. And again, we're not about putting the candidate into a position that they're not fit or suitable for. We want to try and find the right position. So we have to reverse engineer the equation to make sure we find that match for those people. So, you know, I would say that's the initial idea of how people, and I would say industries, we do have partners that we work in Canada, that the U.S. portion of their business, their head offices out in the U.S., have very, very strong ties to the military. So it's about educating companies. It's about letting them know that, you know, these resources are here for you. We can facilitate that relationship, but really allowing them to tap into, you know, these individuals, you know, that have given their time and their life to this country. You know, it's a responsibility from us in the private sector to put individuals and our veterans in the forefront. And I don't think that we've done a very good job, or as well as we should as a private sector to take care of these individuals. So I would love to see that relationship built stronger, communication flowing much easier, to be able to make that transition happen for all veterans.
That's really interesting. And at the risk of putting words in your mouth, what I'm interpreting from that is that it's not so much about the the transitioning veteran needing to focus or develop a new set of skills, unless they choose to. Of course, that's a personal choice. But it's not about chasing whatever the newest thing is. It's about translating what they already have in their toolbox to the opportunities that are out there. Did I understand that?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And again, I mean, you know, if an individual has, you know, a sizable amount of transferable skills, you know, let's call it a millwright or an electrician. You know, if you want to be a nuclear scientist or an IT professional, well, maybe your career skill sets don't align with the work that you've done. But if something is relatively close, you know, we will work with our companies, and we'll be advocates on the veterans' behalf. And our reception has been very, very strong with the customer base. We deal with a lot of Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies across Canada, from, you know, blue collar position, let's call unskilled, to individuals that are middle management to senior management. To us, it's irrelevant. It's about marrying the opportunity to the individual. And that's really where the nugget is.
Fascinating. And of course, Kira, you're there as an example, current of, you know, retraining yourself into one of these, you know, core skill sets of the digital economy, the 21st century economy. So folks, look, I'm mindful of the time. And what I'd like to do before we wrap things up is I'd like to give you all a chance to just offer any closing remarks that you might want to. If there's something that you wanted to say and didn't get a chance, or if you'd like to take exception to something I might have said, that happens, so I'm used to that, then please do so. So I'll start, Kira, I'm going to start with you and give you a chance to go first, and then I'll go around the rest of the panel. Thanks.
I would just like to say thanks again for having me. And I guess reiterate the points, the last points that have been made. There's a lot of kind of buried value in a lot of the veterans that we're seeing today. And my cohorts in my coding program are included in that. And then again, reiterate for the veterans in the audience, if you are looking for a little advice for someone who's your not too far in the future self, feel free to find me. I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to offer more insight into my perspective, the little bit that I have to offer.
Well, I'll take the opportunity right now to thank you, Kira. Thank you so much for joining the panel. Thank you for your service. And thank you for, as I said earlier, your courage for sharing your perspectives and for reaching out and doing something completely different. And that's brave. And I wish you fair winds and following seas, as we would say. So over to you, Eleanor. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I would just like to say how, you know, as I open, my eyes are open to the landscape of veterans wellness and veterans employment. I'm getting a sense of all of the work that's happening behind the scenes. You know, the interface between the CAF transition units and Veterans Affairs, and then the outside organizations like True Patriot Love, who are enabling conversations to make things, you know, better for all veterans. I do think that a gap that we have is in those veterans, the non-commissioned members who may not have access to the folks that, you know, you or I might have access to as we transition. Those mentors who have had a broad range of experiences in the CAF that they're able to then translate into their civilian employment. And so I think what we could do is find a way that we can turn this informal mentorship that some of us are privileged to have and make it a little bit more accessible to a broader membership of the CAF. And thank you very much for the opportunity to engage on this important subject.
Yeah, that's great, Eleanor. And I think, well, I know for a fact that the team are keeping notes, and there'll be a record of some of the key points that have been raised here. And you know, on a personal level, I thank you for joining us today. And I would also commend you for your courage, and I wish you the best in your transition. You're in a great part of the country, and I wish you well, and hope to be in contact with you at your pleasure over the weeks and months ahead. So thanks a lot, and Christine, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. And I also sort of mirror what you said in reference to both Eleanor and Kara in terms of what they've done and what they've accomplished and what they have to offer. And I don't have much to offer here in addition to what have already been said, but I would like to say I'm glad Steve made the comment about broken goods, which unfortunately is sort of a lexicon that is used every now and then. And I think that's entirely unwarranted in many, many ways. And I think getting some success stories out there would be really helpful to be able to showcase the tremendously talented and dedicated people that are, you know, used to serve in the uniform and no longer do that. And my only other point would be better communications on both sides, I think is really important. I don't think vets want to be, for the most part, I don't think they want to be handheld throughout all processes. I think what they want to be is respected and admired for who they are and what they have accomplished in uniform and in service to their country. And I think part of that is being acknowledged in that respect as well. So those would be my last points. Thanks, Mark.
That's excellent. Thanks, Chris. And as always, it's a pleasure to spend time with you and hear your thoughts. Steve, you get almost the final word because I get to provide a summary at the end. But anything that you'd like to add that you haven't had a chance to say or you want to reinforce?
Yes, well, thank you again for putting the event together. It's been a pleasure. Thank you also, Christine and Mark, for providing the charities of your choice. I'll be putting out donations from the Cabin Group to support your organizations. So thank you for providing that. We'd be delighted to support them. One point that I just kind of made a note, and it's been a common theme. The reality is you can only fix the truth. And it's a very powerful comment, but if we're not addressing the real core issues and looking at them head on, we won't be able to fix them. So let's have a candid, open discussion. Where are the shortfalls? What are we doing well? What are we not doing well? Let's plug those holes, put the right processes in place, and let's drive for excellence here. And you know, the quicker we do this, the quicker we can support our veterans and the well-needed tools that we can put in their toolbox, and get them being, you know, contributors to our society like they always want. So thank you again, everybody. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Steve. And, you know, thank you for initiating this and sponsoring the discussion today. And I think, you know, that final comment you made is quite powerful. And I imagine, and as I said in the introduction when we started, we're just trying to initiate a conversation. We're not trying to split the atom and solve all the issues here in one 1 hour discussion. But I think a lot of really good points have come out of this. And one of them is what you just said, that there is definitely room for more conversation. There is definitely room for leadership from industry and from those organizations that would represent veterans. There is good work being done, but there's always room for improvement. And I imagine that that there will be an opportunity for further discussion and perhaps looking at some sort of summit where we could get groups of industry leaders together with some of the key leaders of veterans organizations and discuss some of these issues, hopefully face to face when it's safe to do so in the coming months. So to all of you who chose to spend your lunch hour, for those of us who are in central Canada and wherever you may be, thank you. Really appreciate these 4 hour as much for you as they are for the participants. And again, thank you to the team at Samuel Associates for keeping this whole thing running. Mark Norman, as you know, and it's been a real honor to spend an hour with these incredible people and to have got us through what I think was a really, really useful discussion. So I'll sign off now and wish you all the best for Canada Day and for the remainder of what is hopefully a healthy summer. Thanks a lot. Bye.